If your creative push has helped you, you can help the show by becoming a patron on Patreon. For $20, $10, $5, or $1 a month, you can not only show your support of the podcast, but also do so much to help to cover all the costs. Head to yourcreativepush.com/Patreon to find out all of the goodies that you can get when you become a patron at each of the levels, and thank you in advance for helping this show. Your Creative Push, episode 187.
This is the way the world works. This is how the world responds to you. If you put that message out there, then you're going to get responses. So if you don't tell anybody anything, nobody's going to know.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Tom Harold. Tom is an Indiana artist who combines the precision of mechanics with the feel of a Dr. Seuss book to create exciting, fascinating, custom kinetic metal art that soothes even as it entertains. His rolling ball sculptures offer the viewer sights and sounds that can mesmerize and entertain them for hours. And guys, I really have to insist you go and check out Tom's art to really get an idea of what we're going to be talking about. So definitely, pause the episode to go check it out. There'll be some on the show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Tom Harold. That's HAROLD. Or you can check out his YouTube or Instagram, which is Tom Harold Art. But I have to warn you, you might be mesmerized and stuck there for an hour or more. But Tom, thank you for coming on the show. I have to ask, kind of start out how you got into this type of art.
Oh man. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on the show, Youngman. I really enjoy what you do, and I admire the passion that you pursue it with.
Well, thank you so much, man. Thank you.
You're welcome. How I got into it. My nieces are 18, so this would have been 13 years ago. I went we have a children's museum here in Indianapolis. It's actually the biggest children's museum in the entire world. I know in the whole country. But we have a children's museum here, and I went with my nieces when they were 5 years old, and they have a science center there, and they have a pretty large rolling ball sculpture there that has billiard balls in it. And it was made by a guy, it was at least designed by a guy named George Rhoads. He's kind of if we're doing a history lesson here, George Rhoads is kind of essentially the godfather of rolling ball sculpture, which is what they call the kind of art that I do. And he started doing it in the 70s, and his work is all over the world now. If if somebody's listening to this and they go, oh, I know what he's talking about, they've probably seen it maybe in a museum. There are lots of them in airports, sometimes in hotels. If you're in New York, you probably know the one on the Port Authority bus terminal. That one's really famous. So I saw that thing. I remember walking in and looking at that. And I think I'd actually seen it before, because it had been there for several years from what I understand. But, sometimes it's we aren't ready for something until we're ready for it.
Right.
And I saw that, and I remember standing there looking at it, and just like any of the kids standing there, just like staring at it all wide-eyed. And I looked at that thing, and I think it's got 3 or 4 or 5 different tracks on it. One of them's motorized and runs all the time without anybody doing anything to it. Another track has this great big auger, which I know I've looked this stuff up myself for my own pieces. I know they got this thing. It's for some like garden implement or something like that. It was this screw auger that was like 6 or 8 inches across. And you could turn this crank, and it functioned as a lift. The balls would come in at the bottom, and you turn this crank, and the auger would screw the balls up this ramp towards the top. And there was like so much. It was painted all these different colors, and it had bells on it and wood blocks on it, and all these crazy curves and a jump, and I just looked at the whole thing, and I was amazed that somebody had obviously put an immense amount of time into building a machine that it didn't make cell phones, it didn't make tennis shoes, it didn't provide you with television, it didn't do any of this stuff that machines are all created for this purpose, like a Old steam engines are a really good example of that. They're the earliest of farm implements were a lot of those sorts of machines at the dawn of the machine era. They had a lot of oh gosh, I wish I could have been one of those guys. They were designed with this inherent attractiveness to them, and somebody had built this machine, and it didn't do. I stood back and looked at it, and I said, "This machine does absolutely nothing practical, and it's the greatest thing that anyone has ever created." I said that out loud. I just I was like in the moment with this thing. It's like, this is it. This is like the center of the universe for me. I just thought it was so cool. And it also hit me that I'm into mechanical stuff since I was a kid, but I was raised with a dad who's a real big car nut, and he's got a 27 Ford and a 53 Nash, and so he's had the Ford since before my folks were married, so we went on old car tours and stuff like that. But when I was 16, then I went really over the top with car stuff, and it struck me that this machine made this fabulous transition where everyone who looked at it could understand what I felt when I looked at machinery. Like if I look at, when I now spend a lot of time on, Instagram looking at stuff like this. If I'm looking at a 3.2 barrel setup on a 389 Pontiac motor, and if somebody's like working over the linkage on that, or like a Hillborn fuel injection system or whatever, I'm like, this is so awesome. This is, and nobody else but car guys get that. And I thought it was so fantastic that this machine took these mechanical processes and made them so fun and enjoyable. It was like this great translation machine for, the joy of mechanics and motion. And I was like, this is genius. This is it. This is why I like this sort of stuff. So that was the beginning as far as interest went. And then, you would think like, oh, so I went home and I started building stuff. I did nothing. I went home and did nothing at all. I don't remember what I think at the time I was in a job that I really hated. And I went home and I went back to that job and I just went back to hating my job. I talked about it, I guess. Maybe that was the change. And, if there was a physical change in my life, I started talking about it, and people would ask me about, what do you want to do? I started talking about, I didn't like my job anymore. I wanted to change careers. And they said, what do you want to do? So I just started talking about everything that sounded interesting. And invariably I would say, I want to build this big, they've got this ball machine thing at the Children's Museum. I want to build this billiard ball thing, like I sounded like an idiot. I sound like, I want to make this ball thing, and it's going to like go this way, and then have these things do this thing, and I just thought, that was every once in a while I would say that. But I knew a little bit that I knew about it. I was like, well, obviously I need to learn how to weld, and I don't know how to weld. And so that was really kind of the stopping point right there, was that I didn't know how to weld. I'm like, oh, well, and I knew enough from my car background to know that you couldn't just go and buy any old welder and start welding stuff together. I needed at least some general guidance, if not some, training to have it, come out the way I wanted it to come out. And I let that stop me for a really long time. And I didn't know that there were any resources either. That was the root beginning of the whole thing, was seeing that George Rhoads sculpture in the Children's Museum.
Yeah. Now, I think a lot of people can relate to that. I certainly can relate to that idea of being super inspired by something, but then thinking of all the blocks, all the hard things that you have to do in order to learn how to do that thing that you really were that inspired by, to see it and say, that's like the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. So you said talking about it. Once you kind of started talking about it to other people, was that the thing that kind of pushed you to like kind of convince yourself to start to learn? This is something I learned like I said, at the time I was also doing a career search, and I was very, very, very fortunate at the time and I actually met him before all this started going on, but I met a friend of mine who was a huge inspiration
in the sense of kind of reinventing your life or turning your life around, starting over. Mm-hmm. He had been a salesman for the food service industry and was generally dissatisfied with his life in a lot of ways. His life story was basically that he decided he wanted no part of that anymore whatsoever. And he had been very passionate about music when he was younger. He just quit his job and he started going to music school with no idea what he was going to do at all. And he came out the other end of it and became a music therapist and did very well for himself that way. So I had this concrete example of possibility in front of me, and he was extremely supportive. Since he had gone through this big change, he knew a lot of the things that you needed to do to go through a big change. And he told me when I was looking for a job, he says, you need to talk about this. You need to tell everybody about what you want to do. He says, it doesn't seem like that big a deal, but the more you talk about it, the more other people are going to hear about it. And things will, he says, this is the way the world works. This is how the world responds to you. If you put that message out there, then you're going to get responses. So if you don't tell anybody anything, nobody's going to know. I didn't consciously do that with that. I did that with it was part of what I was talking about with this whole career change. And in a very large sense, what the artwork that I'm doing now came out of the simple desire of I don't like my job. I want another job. And art was not on the table. I actually went to school for journalism and English, and I was and I did photography too. And it seemed like it really seemed to me like you always wanted to be a fiction writer. You're going to, let's go do that. And this totally came out of left field. And it was a little hard to get with that, to be okay with that, to accept that as a serious life pursuit, because it seems pretty insane. My parents were have always been supportive of me, but I also grew up in a very practical household, and I've since kind of been. I always thought artists were like born people, and if I was going to be an artist, I would have shown my genius at 6 months, right? Or something like that's really my thought about it. I'll never be as good as anybody else. I'm. Even in high school, I took art in high school. I remember thinking, you can take art. You've always liked art. Take it in high school. And this is going to be your last big hurrah. You'll never be able to do art the rest of your life because nobody can make a living as an artist. So I went around talking about this stuff, and that just kind of was part of the conversation. And the way that directly paid off is that same guy I was telling you about who made the big change in his life. He sent me one night, he sent me an email, and it had a YouTube link in it. And this is in the days before everybody and their brother was on YouTube 24 hours a day. It was bigger then. It wasn't in its infancy, but it was not the go-to for absolutely everything at the time. So it had not even occurred to me to go to YouTube and look these things up. As a matter of fact, I was definitely of the mindset that was the only sculpture like it in the entire world. It was beyond me to think that somebody would make more than one of those. And he sent me a link and said, is this that ball machine sculpture stuff you're always talking about? And I clicked on the link, and it was a video of a sculpture by Eddie Bose called Island Adventure is the name of that one. And it used 1-inch balls, and it was in an enclosure, so it was on a smaller scale, but it was stainless steel, and it was all polished up, and so visually very arresting and a very different sort of style of sculpture making. It was definitely more along the lines, style-wise, more along the lines of sort of fine finish and fine mechanics of something an engineer would do, which I found out later. Eddie actually studied engineering. He's a fantastic artist. His work's very inspiring. And I saw that and I was like so jazzed, this is it, man. This is awesome. Oh, wow, that's so cool. I'm pretty sure that in that video below it, notes below it, I think that there was a note in there about a Yahoo email group for rolling ball sculpture. And that totally got me excited. And I went to that right away, and you had to join, and then you had to be accepted. So I sent off my request right away. And then I think that was at 8:30 at night, and it was still 10:30, and I was sitting in front of the computer looking at every single sculpture I could find on YouTube, and I just kept watching one after another after another. And that was the day the world kind of opened up on that. Because like I said before, I thought there was one, and then I found out there was not only more than one, there was more than one person building them, and they built more than one style. And, I saw that people had made them out of wood. There were a lot that were made out of scrap materials, guys making them out of Legos. And, I just went on and on and on and on. And I guess I wish I could get somebody else's feedback on this. It seems to me like when I get into something, I kind of tend to throw myself in there pretty deep. So I did tons of research after that, and I got signed up for that email list after that. And then I became part of this community of, people that and that email list had an archive. So it was this vast trove of information on how to build those, which was really important at the time. There's still not one single published book about rolling ball sculpture specifically. In fact, there's only one book that's chiefly related to it, and that there's a couple within the last 2, 3, 4 years. There's been a biography published on George Rhoads, so it talks about his life and, of course, all about his sculptures. But it's more about him. It doesn't tell you like this is how you build them, and it doesn't give any history lessons or anything. But that's the only thing that you can find about rolling ball sculpture. There's nothing else that you could go buy at a bookstore about it. It's all online. You have to go dig around and find it yourself. But that was the outgrowth of the talking about it thing. My friend sent me that, he'd heard me talk about it so much. He sent me that link. Then that all of a sudden led me to this, just incredible amount of information that I hadn't had access to before.
There's a lot of parts about that story that I love, and especially like the finding the community part. And you're right, it all stems from just talking about it. Like if you have this thing that you are passionate about, or this idea that you have, and you keep it in your head, it's just going to stay in your head. But when you start to talk about it, I always talk about how that's kind of like the magic of the universe kind of comes back to help you. But I think it's a little bit more practical than that. It's just that you are kind of getting people on board with your interests, with your dreams, with the thing that you are kind of passionate about. And then you have all of this extra set of ears and all these extra sets of eyes to kind of look out for you and send you on this kind of journey with just a simple YouTube clip. You know what I mean? It's, you don't know what's out there, and other people that can help you can really send you kind of on this kind of creative journey where, like you said, a world of possibility opens up for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm a big believer in telling other people, and that's kind of funny. That's one of the things that's like one of the key principles of marketing, which I had never thought I was going to become a big fan of marketing. But to move forward with my artwork, I want to build more. And I got to the point where I wanted to build, I was like, I want to do this every day. And the only way to make it self-sustaining is to get it to, and want to make it pay for itself. And I had to figure out, well, how would I do that? And then I started studying all of this marketing stuff. That's kind of the core of that whole thing is the Chris Gilbo. I think it was either from the $100 Startup or the Art of Nonconformity. I love both of those books, but he says marketing is nothing more than sharing your story with your people. And it works the same way. The more you spread your message out to the world, the greater response that you get back. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that.
Absolutely. Now, I've read your story and you've talked a little bit about it. This idea of kind of trading your passion for security. And I think I'm certainly in that thing too. I have a full-time job, and I do a creative thing on the side. And I think a lot of people listening do have the way that they make money. So like, would you have any advice, or something to say to somebody listening now who, like listening to your story of, standing there in front at the Children's Museum and thinking that's like the greatest thing you've ever seen, but then, going home and just getting back to your kind of daily life, the job that you hate, because you have to, like, to survive. Would you have any advice for somebody who's in that situation?
It's funny. I was just reading I just picked up this book called Art Inc. It's like Art Incorporated. It's by Lisa Congdon.
Yeah, she was on the show as well.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to go listen to that episode.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. All right. Yes.
We'll have that linked in the show notes page, everybody.
Oh yeah, that'll be great. I was just reading in her book last night that she said her strong advice was don't quit your day job.
Right.
And I did not, and I still have not. I can share my story. That's maybe the best way to put it is that, I had a job that was, if I had something that was truly making me miserable and it was just like making it hard for me to get up in the day, that's going to sap any energy that you're going to have for any kind of creative endeavors. If I wasn't bound to it by some sort of pressing financial constraints, I'd probably go get something that, and a lot of artists would say the exact same thing. Go get something that takes less out of you. If you can stay in your, in the pay range that you need to be in, and you can get something that takes less physical or mental or emotional energy, then you can save that energy for your off hours when you can be using it to create. What I ended up doing, I took a writing job at one point. I was working for a software company and I was writing their technical manuals, and I was not the guy they needed for the job. So after 6 months, they told me, we don't need you anymore. So it's just kind of just the way it rolled out. But I'd been working for them and I was still trying to write fiction. Gosh, this must have been the turning point. I was still working on writing fiction, and that job was really taxing, and I had actually stopped writing so much. So when they let me go there, right about that time, I went to an automotive racing trade show. They hold it. It's called PRI. They hold it every year in December in Indianapolis, and I'm really fortunate in that respect that things like that come to my town. And it's this massive show of all the kind of behind the scenes stuff, product wise, about the racing and hot rodding industry. And there's, lathes and mills there and companies that make brakes, and that they have racing trailers and fuel injection companies and engine builders and magazine advertising company, and just absolutely anything that's connected with the auto racing industry is at this trade show. It's massive. So Miller Welders, of course, has a ridiculously huge booth there, and you can actually just walk up there and they've got machines plugged in and you can weld away. It's really cool. So I did that. I went up to one of those guys, and this is just spreading the message. I went over to this guy and said hey, I've been welding and I'm just not, I'd been doing it for about a year at that time, on and off. It was real hit or miss. I'd do some good welds and then I'd have some really horrible ones. And I didn't know why I was doing something right and why I was doing something wrong. I had no idea. So I showed him what I was doing. He says, "You're not really doing anything wrong. You just need to practice more." He said, "Oh, okay." And that's, that was good news and bad news. Okay, I'm on the right track. But the bad news was, I'd come home and some nights I'd only have 15 minutes to weld. Well, I mean, what's that 10,000 hours thing? I was like, it's going to take me years to get my hours in on this. We got to get this, I want to make this happen, man. I'm not waiting that long. I don't like this. And so I went home that night and found a welding class online and signed up for it. I was conveniently unemployed at that time, so I was able to go to whatever class I wanted to at whatever time. And I went, I think it was about 3 weeks long. I don't think it was very long. And I just had, but I had this guy say, "Yep, that's right. No, that's wrong." And that kind of brought a lot more of my skills together in a more usable fashion. I remember I brought one of my really badly made sculptures into him at the end of class. And I said, this is why you're showing me how to TIG weld. And he just laughed. He's like, that. He said, that's crazy. I said, I know, but it's pretty cool, isn't it? And I went home and I got on Craigslist and I was looking for work. I was looking for work everywhere, but I got on Craigslist and I was like, welders, that'd be a way to practice and get paid. I could weld 8 hours a day and, practice for 8 hours a day and get paid to do it. That was the only way I could figure out how to weld a large amount of time, and so I applied to this machine shop and I went out there and he says, so, where'd you weld before? I said, my basement. And he looked, I wish I could share that look he gave me. It's kind of just like, kid, are you kidding me? And I thought, and this is, in the trades, they're not going to cut you a whole lot of slack. And I was just like, I'm going to die here. This was a bad idea. And so they took me over to the weld bench. I met the day guy that worked there, and this was a second shift job. So I met the day guy and he says, yeah, this is what we're going to be doing, which was totally different from how they described it to me in the email. And I was like, it's a whole different weld. And so they ran through the practice things and he says, they give you a test, they set up several different types of welds and have you weld them. And he says, oh man, that looks pretty good. And I said, really? Cool. Thanks. He says, well, here's the parts, put these in this jig and you weld them together. And it's like, he says, can you do that? And I said, yeah, I think so. I did that. And, he says, yeah, that looks pretty good. He says, well, where'd you weld before? I said, my basement. He looked at me again. I was like, oh, God, this guy too. And so he said, just do those. I'll be back. I said, all right. And about 5 minutes later, a couple other guys came over. Well, I can hear them. I've got the hood down. I'm welding and everything. I'm just looking at what I'm doing. And they're talking right next to me at full volume. And he says, yeah, man. He says, this your new guy? And he says, might be. He says, it looks like it's pretty good. And he goes, yeah, man, those welds look pretty good. He says, damn, his hood ain't even dirty. And I bought this brand new welding hood because my other one wasn't working right. So it was like, it didn't have a spot on it. I looked like some guy who's like, yeah, I just bought my welder at the hardware store. I'm a welder now. And I was just like, oh, I'm never going to make it here. And, so they walked away and I just kept, I'm like, well, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. And I kept welding and the guy comes back over and he says, all right, man. And I took the hood off and he says, go upstairs and, talk to Mike. I said, okay. And, so I went up this little stairway and the foreman was up there and he says, Chad says your work looks pretty good. I said, oh, good. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. And he says, so you got any problem with running machines? And I said, no. He says, if you can't weld or something, if you got to run a machine or whatever, are you okay with that? And I said, well, you guys are going to pay me for that, right? And he says, well, yeah. And I said, oh, yeah, I don't care. Yeah, I'll do that. And he says, okay, well, when do you want to start?
Nice.
It's like, that was it.
Yeah.
I was a desk guy, a month ago, and now I'm like a welder guy. And so that was it was essentially a really fantastic internship. And I went there. I did not make enough money doing that job. Looking back on that financially, it was not the best move I could have made. On the other hand, I worked there for about 10 months, and all I did the entire time that I was there was ask questions about anything and everyone. What's this? How's that work? What's this for? What does that do? They'd say, well, we're going to put you on a machine tonight. I'd be like, great, show me how it works. What do I got to look out for? What if I screw something up? What if I break something? What if blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, how come it's making, when the mill makes that noise, what's that? Because, why is that bad? And how come if it turns that color, what is that bad? What does that mean? And I asked every single question I could possibly ask. I learned a lot of basic stuff about welding and machining, and they let me pick a whole ton of metal out of the scrap bin. That was pretty awesome.
Well, nice. Well, a lot of benefits can come from that, and also not being afraid to try. I think a lot of times when people want to have a kind of career change in the direction towards the thing that they're, most passionate about, they look at an application on a job and it says requires this much experience or this many years doing whatever, and to not be afraid to try, because like, what's the worst that can happen is they say no. But also just to be able to learn that much and to not be afraid to be an amateur, like to not be afraid to be the guy that knows the least amount, and to kind of cherish those opportunities to learn as much as you possibly can to move in the direction towards your creative passion, towards the thing that you want to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That job afforded several things. It was a massive paid learning opportunity. And even though it didn't make enough money, it made enough at the time to keep doing what I was doing. And I remember that the year roughly that I worked there, they would also have work slowdowns where they're just, they'd call me and say, "Hey man, we don't have any work for you. Don't bother coming in today." And so I would take those time. I remember one time I said, "Okay," that I had a whole week. They're like, "No, we don't have anything." And I said, "Okay, I'm gonna, I've never tested myself with my artwork. Let's see what kind of sculpture I can build in 5 days." And then I, grabbed a bunch of material and went to town on it. And so I was able to do stuff like that. I thought, okay, well, if I'm off hours at work, then I should be on hours with art. I should always be working on something. Like this was the whole, my idea was like, this was your whole point in doing this, Tom. So if you're not at the day job, you need to be working the second job, or third job. I play in a band too. So, I did that at the same time. I was building a really huge wall. Well, he was huge for me. He was about 4 feet tall. That's a good sized piece. Mm-hmm. And I was building that at the time too. So when they wouldn't call me in, I would just keep my hours, and I'd wake up, get ready to go. I'd, throw all my work clothes on, and then I would go into my own shop instead of their shop, and I would work. If you want to pursue something like that, you need to, and then this was in Lisa's book too, you need to set yourself up serious routines. I mean, people that go to a day job, they show up there, essentially 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and they work. If you want an art career, you're going to have to show up for it with the same sort of
discipline,
regularity, discipline and dedication that you would as if you were getting paid by. I had an artist in one of my marketing groups said this. I thought this was great. She said, when I'm doing something, lots of times, she says, I would like one day to be, charging like 6-figure sums for my artwork. And she said, so I will think to myself, well, what would an artist do who's earning 6 figures for a piece of her art do? So you put yourself in that mindset, you think like, okay, well, all right, let's say I'm making what if I'm an artist who's making $100,000 a year? What do I wake up and do today? And all of a sudden you're like, crap, I'm not doing this or this or this or this or this. That's how I pursued that whole thing. And I was able to get more sculpture completed that year, and the quality was where I wanted it to be. And that was great. And, I ended up with a lot of benefits that year. So that was kind of, if someone's thinking of, we all want to make that leap. I'm still dying to make that leap that day where I can say, so long day job, it's artwork every day for me. That just sounds like heaven to me. But I'm a bit of a realist, and most people that I know, artists that I talk to, they kind of get to this point where they've got so many commissions lined up. They're like, I can't keep my day job. I won't get any of this other work done. Then you kind of sort of know you're at that point where you need to go. But in the interim, if you're in something that's boring, we can all do boring. Desk jobs can be great, particularly if you're a two-dimensional artist. If you're able to do things like, on the computer, or if you can sketch, at your desk or whatever. I had one of my jobs that I had when I was doing fiction work. We were lots of times not given very much responsibility, and it was really easy to kind of wrap up my work early. And I would write fiction while I was sitting in my cubicle.
Nice.
So if I really envy a lot of, if I was doing drawings and sketches, I would sit at my, I would figure out a way to, get extra time. Like I wish I could remember the writer he's a really famous writer. I think he won a Pulitzer or something. Somebody listening to this will know the story, but he got a job somewhere in some kind of warehouse or factory or something. And, the first day that he was there, he found some place in the warehouse where there were these great big, they were like metal tubes of some kind. And he got inside there and he had a notebook and a pencil with him, and he went there every day and hid all day long and wrote all day. And I think he said after like a month or 2 months or something like that, they found him and they fired him. And, but he was like, hey, I figured out how to pay to write for, X amount of, that was the whole point for him. He's like, I need to support myself somehow. You can find ways I definitely would do things on my, on my lunch hour and things like that. And I wasn't to an insane degree. I wasn't going in there and writing for 8 hours a day and doing no work for my employer. But, if you can find things like that, I would do internet research on my lunch hour to find things, if there were, things I needed to know about business, or I would read other artists, other writers' work. And now when I go to work every day, I'm always thinking about, they had me put together a bunch of tables one day about, they were frames that a tabletop would go onto. And I was like, cube frames. And so I went to my shop boss and I said, hey man, what's the best way to put these together if I'm going to do it, kind of quick, and I want them dead square so that they're nailed. And he says, do this, lay them out like this, tack this, put this on there. And then I did I did 6 of them that day or whatever. And I was like, I've got this, man. Like, I build these things all the time. And the last the sculpture I just finished here in December, it was a Christmas gift commission. And I remember the first frame that I put together was it was a frame in one dimension. It was just a great big rectangle for a wall piece. And it took me 2 days to lay the whole thing out and get it all welded together. And I can do a cube frame, that's got 6 sides to it now. And I can get something like that knocked out in no time at all. And it used to take me, it took me like 16 hours to do the first one. And now I can do something and if it goes crazy, I'm like, I know what to do with this. You weld this here and this pulls this in and that pulls these corners and that squares up those corners and da-da-da-da-da. And I don't freak out or anything like that. So find a job that either enhances your opportunities for being creative or one that allows you to save up all your energy for your creativity in the evening. Those are kind of the 2 main paths that people take with that.
Yeah, it's finding those ways to kind of double dip in both your making money and also kind of pushing forward your creative passion, whether it's gaining knowledge or just kind of getting the time to get ahead. But now that you have kind of gained that knowledge and you've been through that tough kind of growing pain, put in those 10,000 hours, I'm sure. Do you have any other things that kind of hold you back? Any resistances that you experience today, like on a kind of daily basis with your commissions and with your personal work? Yeah,
I'm a perfectionist, which my mom used to say that when I was a kid, is like this kind of ad. She'd be like, "Oh, Tom, you're such a perfectionist," because I'd sit there and work on something and work on it and work on it and work on it because I just I never liked it. And this is, me being like this 10-year-old kid, and I'm trying to draw something as good as a 16-year-old kid. And, there was never going to happen. And that was very hard for me to accept. What wasn't apparent at the time, I didn't look at this in high school either, was that lots of times my work would be unfinished. I might have something that was, 50% done and 25% of that was a knockout, but you couldn't show it anywhere. It wasn't done. I handed in stuff in high school that I would get a C on it because it was like the outline of something that was roughly shaded. And I would get stuck at this point, like, well, this looks really good, but I don't like this one part. And what I didn't realize, my thought process that I did not realize was going on at the time was, if I finish it, then it's not going to be perfect, and I can't have that. So I didn't finish things. And in the writing world, they say, remember Christopher Moore is the writer. I love that guy's stuff.
He's really good.
Oh man, he's fantastic. He has so much compassion for his characters. Even he makes them look like wacky nut jobs.
But you still love them.
They're good people, and you can tell he loves these. Man, I love that feeling. Somebody had interviewed him, and he says, yeah, I get it. He says, what would you advise a writer who's looking for an agent? He says, finish your book. He says, every time somebody asks me about getting an agent, I say, well, how far are you along in your book? And invariably they're not done with it. And he says, finish your book, because nobody's going to buy a book that's not finished. I remember that challenge very clearly. I remember sitting down with a short story that I was writing, and that was it. That was the goal. I made the goal, finish the story. It wasn't even how good can I make it. It was like, Tom, you have to finish this, period. That's that's the problem. This is the goal. This is going to be the reward, finish the story. And I went to this coffee shop every night. It took me like 5 nights because I kept making it longer because I didn't want it to end. I didn't, and finally I wrapped it up, and I was like, it doesn't matter if it's not good enough, Tom, it's done. And that's perfect for me, today perfect is done. So I definitely have a struggle with, and I mean, you've seen my stuff. I mean, how many times do you think I look at something and think it's not good enough? Right. You haven't seen the stuff I've cut off. Right. That's always like, no. I have a big pair of bolt cutters that I cut that stuff with. So it makes this big snap sound. There's this crack, and then it falls off, and you're like, oh man, I killed it. It's never going to be good enough. That's really, really tough. And I will physically stand there and tell myself, like, Tom, it doesn't matter. You need to finish this. It doesn't matter if it's good enough. Like, nobody else is going to know what you think good enough is. When you get done with this, they're going to love it. They don't know what's in your head. And I always want to build it 50 times better than, if they say like, oh, I want this commission, and, I want to, like if they would say, oh, I want this commission for $1,000, I want to build a $10,000 piece for them, even if they're not going to pay me that much. Like, right. It's got to be great. I struggle with that a lot. So I have to tell myself a lot, that it's, this is going to be, it's going to be great, even if it's not. But there's that saying, perfect is the enemy of the done. And I would not be where I am now. I've done 20 some pieces, I think now. I started in copper, but I've done, including the copper stuff, I've done over 20 works. And I have lots of times in the morning I'll write a gratitude list, and it made it on the list this morning. It's usually about 10 items long, just kind of whatever's going through my head that morning that I'm gratitude for. And this morning, one of the ones was I'm grateful for all of my completed artwork, because I used to not be able to complete artwork. That's a huge hurdle for me to overcome, and I'm still grateful for that to this day. The other thing is that I told my girlfriend the other day. She's like, "How did it go today?" I said, I did the hardest part. I made a decision. And I'll be looking at something and like, well, I could make it go to the left here and then curve around, and the marble will hit this tipping arm. It'll go down through this chute. But if I do that, it might be cooler if I have it go this other way, and I go through this spiral, and then it goes down this part that wiggles, and I could have it do this loop. And you look at all the possibilities, and it's hard to, then you have to, and gosh, I keep going back to this writing thing. I've learned a lot from writing, apparently. Yeah. You make a decision, and there is a lot of freedom in making a decision. Creativity thrives on constraints. If you took a couple of artists into a room and said, you've got a pile of toothpicks and some tape, and then you give the other, and you give the other person, say, you've got a bunch of nuts and bolts and some scrap metal and, silly putty or whatever. Like, shit gets interesting. Like, this is all you have. And if you just give somebody a charcoal pencil and say, you have to, create something, like, all of a sudden, have you seen the people that and there's even more, you can take this many ways. Like, if you gave somebody a pencil and said, do something with this, some artists will draw with it. But you've seen the guys that are the people, men and women that are carving sculptures on the ends of pencil leads.
Yeah, so cool.
Yeah. So there's more than, so that's kind of where the creativity, like, nobody said you had to draw with the pencil. You can do something else with it. But if you're just if you're given those constraints, so once you make a decision, and I remember reading about this first in reference to storylines in a story. If you choose a path a character is going to take, you automatically cut out all these other paths, but you're able to move forward. If you keep staying in the point where you say, well, I want to have as many possibilities open as I want to keep all my possibilities open, it's going to be really hard to move forward. You have to close the door on certain things to move forward. I watched Wings for Wheels. It was Bruce Springsteen, The Making of Born to Run. And I remember as I was watching that, I went and grabbed a piece of paper and I wrote this down. And when he was doing Born to Run, he said, at that time, my concern was this: I have these abilities. I don't know what they are, but I know that they're there, and I don't know where they're going to lead me, but wherever that is, I have to go, even if it's down a bunch of blind alleys till I find the one I want that I do want to go down. So that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of what that is. Like, I have these things that I can do, and you try all these things, but sooner or later, you figure out what the one, this one path you have to do. So that's that decision making for me. I always want my sculpture to do everything. And I always have a little bit of a, people say, oh, this is so great. You did this thing and it's so great. And my thought in my head was, oh man, you should see what I could do if I could, if I keep waiting for that part that I'm like dreaming of the day that somebody comes to me and they're like, Tom, I want you to build this piece for me. And I want it to be like, I want it to be like 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide. And I want it to have like 18 tracks on it. And it just go at it. And I'm like, God, just let me have it. Just, bring that to me. Because there's out of all the stuff that you've seen me do, there's a billion more ideas in my head that I just haven't been able to carry out yet. And it's constantly a process of like cutting things out. Like, I'd love to do, and it's nice. So when someone gives me, I get parameters when somebody gives me a size or they give me a shape. They say, like, if they say they want a desktop sculpture, that's a totally different layout from a wall mounted sculpture. Or, they say if they want it in a rectangle or a square, or, they want a circular sort of, frame to it. Or, I have one that was really fun to do where they gave me some, glass, those, spheres, those globes that hold air plants. And they said, oh, we're really into air plants. Can you figure out a way to fit these in there? And I was like, yeah, oh man, come on. That's cool. I just had somebody, who, is talking to me about a commission, and they said, we're really into the movement of the planets, and we have these stones that are shaped like the earth, the moon, and the sun. Like, if we send you those, can you put those in there? Like, oh man, come on. Yeah, let's do that. That sounds like fun. So, just those sorts of things set up possibility, and they also kind of remove, if you're working around those, like, that's kind of a limitation. Like, this is what we're working with, or I have to physically account for these objects in the sculpture. So the decision making process can be tough for me, but I think perfectionism is probably that's a really big thing for me. Again, that in Lisa Congdon's book, she was talking about how fear can paralyze an artist, and not just in making the art itself, but in making career choices and, deciding what you're going to do with your career. Perfectionism is all about that fear of not being good enough. And I have to, take a really deep breath and just like, it will be good enough. It may not be perfect, but no one is gonna, if I brought an unfinished piece to somebody and said, sorry, it's just not good enough, or I didn't finish it, they're going to be pretty unhappy about that. If I bring them something that I have finished, they're not going to go, well, Tom, it sure isn't perfect. It's just
right.
It's not the way that's going to go. I've yet to have, all of my reviews have been stellar. So and I'm the only one looking at it going, well, I could have done this other thing. Nobody cares about that. They're really happy with what they got. So that's an internal struggle for me.
Right. I think a lot of people can relate to that. But like you said, there is a joy in being able to make decisions and to get something done and to be a shipper, be somebody that finishes, is so integral to being a creative person, because then those other opportunities wouldn't have a chance to come up. Like you might want to do a million different things, but unless you finish the thing that you're doing now, you won't get that opportunity to do that thing. So
yeah. And I think now that I'm kind of thinking on this a little bit, and this is definitely what doing this kind of artwork is a great way. It's a great exercise for me in overcoming that whole thing about, when kids play, they just do whatever the hell they want. They'll make this fabulous mess of something and not care one bit about, the overall outcome. And that's what I want to get to. When I'm like really in the zone, when it's happening, when I'm like lined up with kind of my purpose in life, and I'm like, oh, then I feel like a kid. I'm like, look, I did this thing. It looks really cool. And I'm going to do this other thing. And I had that happen a little bit on this last piece I was doing. I like totally let go. And I was like, well, but what if you do that and then this other thing doesn't work? Like, who cares? We'll figure that out. Just do this. It'll be cool. And I'm sure other artists feel this way. Like sometimes, like, should I have a message? I don't feel like I got a message here. Like, there's nothing confrontational about my artwork. I'm not like forcing people to look at. It doesn't feel like there's this big thing about me, forcing people to look at an issue or, But what I have thought about a lot, what I get out of it, what I got out of it when I saw George's sculpture in the Children's Museum, was that whole idea of, let go and just enjoy the moment that you're in, and allow yourself to have that feeling that children feel, that we stop allowing for ourselves when we become adults, is like, just, whatever you're doing, even if it, in that moment, it's like looking at this sculpture, just enjoy it. Just be okay with everything as it is, and allow yourself, this feeling of fun or this feeling of peace and enjoyment for a few minutes. And, I think that very, very often as adults, it's just far too easy with all the responsibilities you get placed upon you. It's far too easy to go that route. And that's probably some kind of greater metaphor for me, wanting this change in a career from something that was what I thought I should be doing to something that I, allowing myself to do something that I absolutely love to do, that I have this great passion for. I did one of my sculptures, the most recent one that's been added on my website. It's in a library in downtown Indianapolis. And I was there one day checking up on it. And there was a security guard there. And he says, "You made this?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Man," he says, "you get stuck watching this, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, you kind of do." And he said, "You spend your whole lunch hour staring at this thing." He said he's like walked up to it and realized that he stood there for 30 whole minutes and watched it and never did really go get lunch.
Right.
I thought, all right, well, I'm doing some good in the world.
Yeah. And like you said, it's a machine without purpose, but I think the purpose is that story you told in the beginning of just standing there in awe and saying, this is the coolest thing ever. You know what I mean? And to bring that joy to other people, I think is what art and creativity, it's what it's all about. It's bringing that joy, and it doesn't have to necessarily say a message or have this grand purpose other than to entertain and to bring happiness to other people the way it brings happiness to you.
Mm-hmm. I think if my work brings any kind of challenge to people, it is that we're used to this idea that machines perform a function. It's a car gets us from point A to point B, or it builds something that we need, like Xbox consoles or something like that. Then the challenge kind of is like, it's really easy to dismiss something like that and look at it and just be like, well, it doesn't do, and I've had people look at it and they go, well, yeah, but what does it do? And well, it does this, and they like, this is what it does. And so that's kind of, if there's anything, it's that challenge of like, just, I don't think people ever walk up to a whole bunch of flowers and go, well, that's fine and everything, but what do they do?
Right.
You look at them, look, that's what they do. Look what they're doing like right now. And they perform this greater function and as far as like the cycle of life goes. But that, the thing that they do for most of us is they, most of the people that have them, in their yards or whatever, like they just look nice, that's the thing that they do. And they, for a lot of, they can also like give you this feeling of, of life and have this, that energy that life brings and happiness. And so, yeah, as you were saying, it's kind of that whole thing about like, this is just what it does. And this is, maybe it will make you feel a certain way. And so that's it. I think if anything, there's, and I don't know, I definitely didn't, have never set out with this sort of thing in mind, but it's that there is a bit of a challenge for people to just stop what they're doing for a minute and take a moment for themselves and just enjoy the moment they're in. I have had people tell me that it's like watching fish swim,
yeah.
Which I thought pretty much hit the nail on the head, because you can just, the ones that I make that are automated, you can just stand there and watch them. And a guy at the library told me, he said, it's really, really, he says, it really brings people together. There will be two people standing there looking at it who are obvious strangers and from total different backgrounds, and they'll start talking to each other about it.
Right.
And kids get it right off the bat. They're just, they just run over and smash up against the glass, and they're into it. And it's great. And the one I always like from adults is kind of that the little uncontrollable chuckle. They'll stop, they'll like glance over at it, and then they'll stop walking and they'll look at it and they'll kind of step back half a step and smile, and then all of a sudden they go, It's like just and I'm like, like it's so enjoyable. They can't help but make that little sound. I'm like, oh yes, I got him.
Yeah, man, that's what it's all about. It's that joy. Tom, thank you so much for coming on the show. Before we let you go, it's time for the final push. This is where I ask you to kind of reach through the microphone and just grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best advice and just push them to pursue their creative passion, whatever it may be.
Oh man, if you really believe in what you're doing, don't listen to anybody that tells you it's not worth your time. Find people around you who are supportive of this passion that you have, and there will be plenty of messages out there about not being able to do something. I think there have been more people who have uttered the word starving artist than ever have, been any kind of an artist, whether well paid or starving. So I don't think they know what they're talking about. Go find the people who are doing what you are doing and who are a big, massive, crazy success at what you're doing, and connect with those sorts of people in any way possible, whether they've written a book that you've read or they are available to chat with online, or whether you can go see them in person. Find evidence of the achievement of the goal that you're after and find all the people that have done that, and that will get you where you want to go.
Yep, and find that information also, like you said before, talk about it. Don't be afraid to kind of scream from the mountaintops what it is that you're interested in and where you want to go, because you don't know what you don't know. So
yes,
just try to get people on your side.
Conversation like 2 days ago. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Yeah, and this podcast is a fabulous example of, it's a great font of information on finding people who have made great achievements creatively and who are making that sort of thing work. So I love it. Thanks for making it available to all of us.
Oh, well, thank you, man. I appreciate that, and thanks for being a part of it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you again.
And you can find Tom on his website, which is, again, tomharold.com. That's TOMHAROLD.com. He's on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, Tom Harold Art. Definitely check out his website, check out everything. He not only has like the really cool videos that will like we were talking about, keep you captivated and keep you kind of mesmerized for up to hours on it with his rolling ball sculptures, but he also has build up and instructional videos there too. Really, really interesting stuff. So definitely check that out. And again, everything will be at yourcreativepush.com/Tom Harold. Tom, man, thank you again.
Thank you, Youngman. It was a pleasure.
My thank you once again to Tom. So many good things in this episode, but one of the things that I really wanted to recap on was this idea of perfectionism. Like Tom was saying, it's something that he struggles with still, and I think it's something that a lot of us can relate to. The idea of just wanting to keep working on something, wanting to make it bigger and better all the time, and not finishing it off. But sometimes it's better to save that desire that you have for that piece, for the next piece, whatever that is, the next song, the next story, whatever it is that you're doing, to keep that passion going, to bring it with you into the next thing, and to not get too stuck in the thing that you're currently doing, just to make it say what you want to say, but not like splashing all the colors onto it so that the message kind of gets lost. And I have definitely struggled with this personally in my writing, but there is a beauty in minimalism. Not necessarily minimalism, but just saying what you want to say in your voice, simply put. Because when you try to do too much, or when you try to say too much, things get loud, things get crowded. And I know that, especially in Tom's case, you want to keep building and making things bigger and grander and pushing and pushing because you can. But like we've talked about so many times before on the podcast, there's so much to be said about having a finished product, about having a finished piece of work, and not letting that perfectionism bug keep, creeping in and making you tweak and tweak and tweak and build and build and build until you have a completely different thing than you kind of set out to do. There's this like sexy power in having a finished product. So take that inspiration that you have while you're working on it and move on to the next thing and keep that thread of creativity going. And like Tom said with his writing, you have to close the door sometimes on your characters in order to move the story forward. You have to close off those like potential pathways that you can go down in order to actually finish the product. So really good advice from Tom. And definitely, if you haven't yet, definitely check out his art. There's something about it that, kind of like he said there at the end, it just makes you want to watch. It makes you want to just sit there and watch, and it does bring people together. And it gives me this like brain tickle thing that I've talked about before. I really should copyright that. But it's just this like intrinsic connection that you can make, not just from the artist to the viewer, but from the viewer to another viewer, like he was talking about with the people standing there and having a conversation about it. And I think that's what art is all about. So if you can try to find that power in your art, your creative passion, whatever it is, to bring people together, to have a discussion about what it is that you created, even taking you out of the picture, I think that you are on to something amazing. So definitely check out his stuff again. yourcreativepush.com/Tom Harold, TomHarold, to check that out. And that is all I've got for you today. Hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done. We will be here for you next week if you need the push again. It is our 1-year birthday next week. So we really hope to see you back there to, kind of celebrate this whole message of pushing creativity and pushing past our creative blocks to get the things that are inside of us out there. So definitely tune in next week. But until then, I hope you have a wonderful, productive weekend, and we will see you next week if you need that push again. I love you all, and we will see you then. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.